Okay.
Hey,
Is
Facebook
there?
Live. We are
Mhm.
live with Gabriela Rodrigues. We are looking forward to this. Gabriela, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. And you gave a great talk that really applies to all of us. And what I'm doing right now, I'm going to live tag you
Okay.
here in the Facebook Live so that some of your friends and your family and your fans can check this out. Come on.
Okay.
Oh, I have to hit two edit posts. Here we go.
Did it work out?
Nope, we're good.
Okay.
We are good. All right, just edited that.
Okay.
Now we've got viewers, we've got all kinds of people that are finding this because of the live tag for you. Do you have any questions for me, or we'll just jump right in?
No, I feel like I watch, as I told you, I watched the other podcast, so I feel like I'm prepared so far. So I'm ready to just get into it.
All right, let's do it. All
Okay.
right, we are live in three, two. We are live with Gabriela Rodrigues. Gabriela, are you ready to talk?
I'm ready to talk, Nathan. Thank you.
Gabriela Rodrigues is a disability rights activist, public speaking enthusiast, and business administration student at Northeastern University. Inspired by her siblings, she aims to change others' perceptions of disabilities and adoption. Gabriela Rodrigues, welcome to the talk.
Thank you, Nathan. Thanks for having me too.
Now, this is pretty amazing because you are in college right now. When you were in high school or recently, you've not just given one talk, but you've given multiple talks. So your talk, the most recent one, if I'm not mistaken, is Adoption Breaking Our Barriers. And then the other one is called The Impact of Our Words on Prejudice. So congratulations on having more
Thank you.
talks under your belt at this point than I do. I'm on your tail, though. I'm trying to catch up. Please
Thank
take
you.
us behind either one of the talks.
Yeah. So my most recent one is actually the impacts on of our words on prejudice, and I started with the adoption story because it had been really recent. My family had just adopted my siblings, right? So um, just taking everyone like behind the story actually. So I have two biological brothers. I have a 10-year-old brother, and I have more recently a 3-year-old brother, and he was born diagnosed with Down syndrome,
Mhm.
right? And so that really changed my family's perception on disabilities because at first we were like super scared. We didn't know anything about Down syndrome, so we were super concerned at that point in terms of how we could best support him like throughout his life. And once he was born, we realized that it was just there was no reason for us to be concerned, right? So just I realized that if more families knew more about Down syndrome at the time that their children were diagnosed, then everything would be so different, right? Like for everyone else. And so I started doing a little bit of activism in terms of that, in terms of just writing articles, talking about people, mostly just word of mouth. And then I decided to do my TEDx on adoption after my family adopted another child with Down syndrome and my sister with spina bifida as well. And I realized that the thing with adoption is that people really don't consider it a major option, right? Like people only consider it as a last resort. So it
Mm.
turned out that my objective with that TEDx talk was just to just convey to people that it doesn't have to be a last resort, right? Like there's wonderful kids out there who need and want a family, and there's tons of families who need and want a child and don't adopt because of multiple barriers within their whether that may be just prejudice with adoption, like that they don't know enough about it, or like financial barriers and all of that. So I just wanted to inform people more about that.
Well, and you gave a couple of real powerful statements in these talks. You you made the statement discrimination is a bigger obstacle than any physical barrier. That's my paraphrase. And you also
Yeah.
mentioned that 1 in 4 people with disabilities or whatever, insert your more politically correct term here, special abilities or whatever, but 1 in 4 people deal with daily discrimination on a
Yeah.
daily basis. I had no idea. I mean, I understand in my very limited privileged experience, very little, obviously very little discrimination or anything like that. I was not aware, daily discrimination for people in this demographic. So please tell us a little bit more about that and how you found those statistics and how you research that.
Yeah, so I was just when I was looking into actually doing research for my TEDx talk, I was wondering just like where can I get like actually accurate statistics on this because there's a lot of really biased resources nowadays. So I looked into a lot of websites in terms of websites such as National Organization on Disability. Like they have a lot of good statistics in terms of like employment for people with disabilities, and then websites such as for the National Down Syndrome Society and all of that. Like they have really important points that need to be made that a lot of people aren't aware of, as you mentioned, right? Like so people with disabilities really do go through a lot of discrimination even on a daily basis, right? And as my siblings are still children right now, like they're 3 years old right now. So um, even at that age, we've noticed prejudice comes from
Mhm.
adults and not children. Children accept them super well. They get along super well. They play at school, everything else.
Mhm.
Um, but adults are often like the issue with this because we do have like our biases, right? That like come from previous generations. So my objective whenever I'm talking to people and raising awareness about this is just showing people that those biases are just biases, right? Like they're not the reality. And so um yeah, that's what I have to say mostly like about that statistic. It's just it's really sad to see that that's a reality, but it's more important for more people to know about that so that we can fight it.
One of the things that I love about your talk is that it really raises this issue of adoption, and there are all kinds of different ways to adopt. You're not
Mhm.
necessarily talking about fostering and adopting that way, but you are talking about special needs adoption, which is a major need
Yeah.
for and resource, if I can put it that way, for people who are looking to adopt. So if there's someone in Talk Universe and they're looking to adopt right now and not really sure that they have what it takes to adopt a special needs baby, what would you say to them?
That's a hard question in
It
terms
is a
of just
hard
like
question. I
yeah.
thought that would be an interesting question.
Yeah, but it's not hard in terms of just like giving the actual advice, but it's hard to like say it in a way that won't be like that won't make people adopt if they're not ready or just like discourage them if they are ready. But my entire point with special needs adoption is it's not super different from adopting a child without disabilities, right? And I always talk to my parents about this. Like, there's really essentially no difference between having a child with disabilities or without disabilities. The difference, essentially, is just like you need to give them extra support, which is something that you should be ready to give as a parent in general. They just need, you need to be able, you really, really need to be able to fight people at like talk to teachers and all of that at school. You need to be able to like defend them from prejudice and all of that. But if you're thinking right now of adopting a child with special needs, the thing that you really need to think of is, are you ready to love that child unconditionally and just are you ready to give them the resources that they need to thrive and all of that? Like um in terms of like, for example, my brother with Down syndrome, like he'd never done physiotherapy before because he'd spent his whole life at the orphanage, right? So it's just that kind of those kinds of resources that they need to be able to like ready and able to provide their children with, other than terms of support and love. But really, there's nothing that I can think of that's like, oh yeah, be wary of this, like be
Mhm.
careful with this. You might not want to do it because of it. There were no setbacks for us. Like we've only been happier since we adopted my siblings. So my advice is always just like make sure that you're ready to provide those resources and that you're ready to love them unconditionally. But that shouldn't be too different, right? Like if you're thinking of adopting a child without disabilities in the first place.
Well, we've been enjoying this conversation with humanitarian and TEDx speaker Gabriela Rodrigues. Her talk is called The Impact of Our Words on Prejudice. And we're going to talk more with Gabriela in a moment about your upcoming Talk Universe in just a moment in the Blitz Round.
Great, thank
And
you.
we're back with the Blitz Round with and we're back. It's time for the Blitz Round with Gabriela Rodrigues. I'm going to ask Gabriela a series of either or questions related to the preparation and performance of her recent talk. Gabriela, are you ready?
I'm ready, Nathan.
All right. First question, were you invited to speak or did you apply?
I applied.
What advice do you have to help the rest of us get accepted?
So when I applied, I really focused on the fact that I really liked public speaking and that I didn't have trouble with being on a stage and all of that. So I think that's something that's important for a lot of speakers to focus on. Like if they have some kind of experience already, really focus on that, on the fact that you already know that what you're doing, right? At the time that I applied, I didn't have any experience. That was my first official public speaking opportunity, but I had done things in terms of leadership within my own school. So that's something that I focused on.
Well, great. So in terms of your preparation, are you a memorizer? Are you an improviser or a blender?
I don't, but well, from what I imagine those words mean, I imagine myself being more of a blender. I mean, I do memorize some key points that I want to be said, right? But I don't like memorizing scripts. I used to be that kind of speaker. I used to be a memorizer, and then I realized that the stories that I like telling and the speeches I like giving are really personal and like about stories and all of that. So memorizing it really isn't the point of it doesn't get the point across, right? So for me it's always about like improvising the emotional and personal parts but memorizing the key points and like statistics, for example, that I need to mention in my speeches.
Gabriela, this is a different question. If you don't mind answering this, how old were you when you gave your first talk?
Oh, when I gave my first talk, I was 15.
15.
Yeah, I was
So what
15.
was that like? You walk out on stage as a 15-year-old giving a TED talk.
Well, I think regardless of age, it's always scary to just get yourself out there like that, right? It's a little scarier when you're younger because it's easier for people to criticize you, I guess. If you're a little younger, people are like, oh yeah, they weren't prepared at all in the first place. Like they're just 15 or something like that. So I really wanted to set a standard for myself, especially because it was my first public speaking opportunity. So it was scary, but I think I prepared enough for that. And I knew what I was saying because it was mostly about my adoption story. So I think that's all I have for in terms of how it felt when I did my first TEDx talk.
What is what was the most painful part of your talk that you had to cut out?
I think I had so much to say in both of my talks because if I could sit here and just talk to you for 3 hours straight about like what's wrong with how people perceive disabilities, what's wrong with how people perceive adoption, I could sit here for 3 hours straight just talking about that. And so it was really hard to cut out specific information in terms of even when I was telling the adoption story. Like I focused a lot at first on how it felt to walk into that orphanage and like see all of the kids there. And then I realized that I had to cut that out so that I had more time to actually talk about the outcome and how it's a happy ending necessary, like that it was a good thing for my family. And so it was really painful having to cut out all of that because it was a really emotional and like really deep moment for me, like walking into that orphanage, like seeing all of the children there. My brother at the time, like he was, oh my God, he was so skinny. He was I think on the brim of starvation and all of that. So it was really painful seeing that situation. And I wanted to include it in my TEDx talk, but I had to cut it out. But it was painful having to cut it out too.
And this is a little late in the game for me to ask this question, but we're not just talking about special needs adoption, but we're talking also about international adoption,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, that's a whole can of worms right there, because I've family
It's
members
hard.
who have internationally adopted, and I mean that is its own category. And then on top of that, the special needs adoption. So good for you, good for your family, and you got to watch Gabriela's talk, because Talk Universe, because you're going to hear what kind of a fierce advocate she has been, not just for special needs and for human rights and everything else, but just for her own family. She was a real
I had
stakeholder.
to.
You really lobbied for your family,
Mhm.
even over and beyond the generosity that your family already displayed. That you kept lobbying, and it's just a fascinating story. So we've been talking with Gabriela Rodrigues. Her talk is called "The Impact of Our Words on Prejudice." If you want to watch that talk, and I recommend that you do it, go to our show notes page at bethetalk.com. If you don't want to type that into YouTube, you can also link in with Gabriela, who is currently a college student. So she's got a lot of time in front of her, but I know that she's going to be interning and looking for all kinds of different opportunities. So if you're in that kind of position, you want to have interns and people who are bright and articulate, then you're going to want to connect and linked in with Gabriela, and you can do that on our website. We will have the link right there, and we will be back with Gabriela Rodrigues' final word of advice in just a moment. And we're back with the final word of advice from Gabriela Rodrigues.
All right. So I've been thinking a lot about what my final word of advice would be in terms of TEDx talks, but I think to this day, the most important thing that we need to focus on, and just something that people completely miss out on, is your body language says as much as what you're actually saying. People focus so much on their message, but I can't focus on your message if you're pacing back and forth all the time, right? It's something that people don't focus on that much, and obviously people recognize that it's important. But there's never been a consensus in terms of like, oh, you should walk around, you should stand still. So find whatever your pattern is and stick to it. Like if you're saying something and your body language doesn't say that you're confident, that you know what you're talking about, people won't pay attention to you. So that's definitely my final word of advice. Like, really practice your body language. Don't let the fact that you're nervous get to it, because people won't take you as seriously as you're supposed to be taken if you're not focusing on that.
Well, Gabriela Rodrigues, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Thank you so much, Nathan.
All right, that's a wrap. Great job.
Thank you. I didn't know what to expect, so here we are.
No, you did great. Did
Thank you.
really, really good job. And man, what a great point at the end. You said it, not me. Sometimes we get into that.
People don't focus on body language. It really frustrates me, because sometimes I'm listening to a great talk and it's like, man, I just really wish you hadn't been pacing back and forth the whole time so I could pay attention to you. So that's something that people need to focus on.
Well, you've heard, this is kind of old school, Gabriela, but you've heard of, if you like movies, you've probably heard of that guy, that British guy, Alfred Hitchcock.
Oh, yeah.
You've heard of that name. So I forget which movie it was, but he was showing a tennis match, and it was a little bit comedic instead of intriguing or horrific or whatever. And so the whole thing was, it was just a crowd of people at Wimbledon or somewhere, and everybody had like sunglasses on, and you have a whole crowd of people, and they're like this, and they're like this, and then they're like this, and that's kind of what we have to do when somebody's going over here, and then they go over here, and we're looking, and it makes you tired. And when you're tired, you're not listening to what the person's point is anymore.
Especially if you're one of the last speakers, for example. Like, everyone's tired, everyone just wants to go home right now, everyone's like been inspired enough, so you need to get your game on and get people paying attention to you.
Come on, get game and hire a coach. I mean, once you get accepted, for sure. I mean, there's really no excuse not to do your absolute best. Once you get accepted, I mean, Gabriela felt it. You applied. We didn't go into the ups and downs of that. But once you actually get accepted, it's like I've really got a responsibility, because this
Yeah.
isn't just about me getting accepted anymore. Now they have committed to me and I've committed to them, both of us, to do our absolute best for these amazing people, for the sponsors, for the people that are paying,
Exactly.
$30, $50, $100 a ticket at many of these events. I mean, you've got to really do your absolute best, and a coach can help you on all of
Yeah.
that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I was fortunate to like be able to meet with some people at my school who were coaching us, so to speak. And so
Mhm.
I was lucky to have that resource too. But definitely, like coaching is a must.
Yeah, well, and that's a good coach who is not just says that they're a TED coach, but is actually given a TED talk or a
Exactly.
TEDx talk, will be able to help you. And if you're doing, or if you have like a nervous tick,
Mm,
and you're talking like this, and it's just nervous, it's not, an uncontrollable thing. But if you're doing something
exactly.
that is visually or auditorially or any other kind of distraction or disruptive thing, a good coach, or any coach really, is going to speak up and say, look, you paid me to help you invest in this.
Yeah,
Stop doing this. Work on this. Don't do it.
exactly. That's something that's really important.
Yeah. Well, for sure. Well, hey, thanks all for joining us today. And even if you're watching the replay of this, feel free to share, and that helps Gabriela get her message out. Feel free to comment, because Gabriela is tagged on this and she'll be able to answer your questions. And feel free. The podcast episode will come out in about 5-6 weeks. And that's why we record this broadcast, so that you can spread it ahead of time. So congratulations, Gabriela, on
Thank
your
you.
amazing family, and joining us for a great interview here today.
Thank you, Nathan.